backstory, I uh, more recently have been allowing my body to really heal, reset, and come back to more of a like neutral, grounded space. I have been on a guided healing journey, very intuitive. And more recently, as my nervous system really starts to settle and there's some safety and grounding, I'm aware of having healed some family system dysfunction and healing the ancestral lineage that I was born into, and experiencing some miracles in my own family dynamics and just personally in my own body and awareness. And many years ago, I was sharing a lot of just again intuitively guided perceptions. I've been guided by a paradigm shift on the planet, and spiritual awakening has been very much a part of that, and being guided to share on the internet with regards to some of these insights. And more recently, I've come off of Facebook and Instagram, and I'm having quite a pull to really reflect and look at the phone addiction uh, in a larger framework of our enslavement and humanity's enslavement, and again having an awareness of systemic collapse, or yep, systemic collapse, and how that's triggering, among other cataclysmic events, a broader evolutionary awakening for the human species on the planet. And I made some notes yesterday. So very recently, I've started writing again, and am having more inspired thought around our awakening process, the kind of multidimensional or like layered effect of healing, awakening, ancestral healing, and how that really sort of coincides with um well, yeah, systemic collapse, a collapsing of old paradigm, recognizing that it's multi-generational. This is where our deeper connectivity and the evolution of our consciousness is one and the same, of collapsing these structures, which are uh, anchored really in brutality, force, war, deception, manipulation, divide and conquer, blame and attack. And coming back into some of my original insights, and I'm sort of mind blown still at my own journey, and the twists and turns and the ebbs and flows, and the high vibratory and the kind of fall from that, and the time that it's taken to just come back into a neutral, grounded space where I can hear that this sort of divine voice, or that voice of wisdom from within, and just having a very quiet life, and still teaching yoga online, and really kind of creating a sacred space in my own home life dynamic, and having no shame whatsoever around sleeping and resting and healing. And I notice that the more the body heals, the more inspiration comes through. And as far as, how to explain all this stuff from different perspectives that may be useful to people, right? And so I've made some notes. I guess I'll focus. So I want to focus on the efficacy of healing, and how our emotions and feeling our emotions are such a profound piece to breaking down the structures. and it connects, you think of like the cells of our body or the plasma of the body, and how for years I would say this on retreat, that often when somebody's crying, somebody will say, "What's wrong?" And that we have, again, systemic um, trauma, and then layered um, shameful perceptions around feeling. And then obviously in manifestation and all that, there's such thing as toxic positivity now, and I think more people are just awakening to that toxicity, and how it's also anchored in a colonialist patriarchal supremacy kind of structure, and how healing the being is so much more profound and deep and broad than we might initially think when we are endeavoring it, when we decide to get therapy, when we decide to work with a healer, when we decide to meditate, when we decide to like take on some of these higher consciousness tools or teachings, right? And I'll speak to self-reflection. I wasn't sure the word to use, so I chose self-reflection, but the other words I was thinking was solitude, quietude, why finding more stillness and more peace and more quiet in our lives, and of course why systemic oppression wants people to be enslaved and in survival mode, because when we're in survival mode, it's dang near impossible to really access a clear thinking mind. But remembering that a clear thinking mind doesn't necessarily like it, rationale and logic has almost been a priority, or been prioritized in our three-dimensional false matrix patriarchy system of oppression, system of control. And there's so many different ideations around the historical framework, right? And I am what I am. So I am speaking from my race, my gender, you know, and my own pure desire to make the world a better place. And never could I have imagined like the profundity of that path and the continuation. I did a share for my Patreon community about the long game, a little energy update, that we're really anchoring in these structures for the long haul. And there was something that come to me about, we have to recognize that we're detaching from these oppressive structures to heal and to make manifest greater joy, benevolence, health, and well-being on our planet. And that you could say, from a limited perspective, that these structures have been being in place for thousands of years. And so the deconstructing of these structures it's going to take time, hundreds of years before we start to see that real effective rebuilding. And yet some of us are here to start that rebuilding process, right? And why is the sort of these spiritual concepts so important? Because our individual spiritual connection, right, beyond the form that we are and beyond the earthly experience that we are, is really the yoke, or the life force, the spark of aliveness as to why we're here is deeply connected to our spiritual connection, which again could be those little inner voices, as it were, but they often speak in metaphor or in a whisper, or and bearing in mind it feels good, when we're connected to that voice, it feels harmonious, it feels true, which is why solitude, self-reflection, quietude is an important part of the game, as it were. because it's the elixir, it's the kind of divine essence that helps us to regenerate, that helps us to stay alive, to stay connected. And I'll speak to that because from even when we go through the turbulence, when we're going through the deepest, darkest, ugliest parts of the shadow, the most painful parts of ourselves, whether it's our own or whether it's ancestral, sometimes the logical mind, often the logical mind needn't be involved. We simply have to move through the fire, as it were, of those wounds of neglect, rejection, abandonment, guilt, shame. Those are those human lower bass tones, and there's nothing inherently wrong with them, but healing generational trauma usually comes with healing because, generational trauma is deeply connected to religious construct. Religious construct through power and domination is connected to keeping people in fear, keeping people guilty, and perpetuating cycles of shame and guilt, right? So we have to move through those deep layers of shame and guilt and rejection and neglect and abandonment to then come back into more of our totality of self, which when the nervous system is more healed, it's just being more calm, it's being more centered, it's not having those profound emotional highs and lows, and yet feeling more wholeness with regards to our capacity to love ourselves, right? So I'm just going to go through some of the notes here, and which I've covered a little bit, but so there's a rise of femininity, and again, that's not gender specific. That's just more men and women alike who are endeavoring their healing, are accessing the denied feminine. So, and the we could look at it reflected back to us in the structure on a physical dimension. Why is there such thing as feminism? Why are more women fighting for their rights? And that's still across the board, globally speaking, because part of the old control structures would have wanted to control and deny women, because there was a time in ancient times or whatever, with matriarchal cultures where women were leaders and healers, right? So through the womb of wisdom and the actual physical body of the female, there's access to that deeper healed state and awareness and our connectivity to the earth. And so the rise of femininity is also aligning with the rising of matriarchal teachings, which is circle rather than lines, right? And an honoring of cycles, because women have a cycle, right? So, and those cycles are directly connected to the moon and the tides. Um, so then that inherently connects us to why women as shamans or as herbalists and witches or whatever were often sought after for the wisdom, for the healing, for the medicine. And whereas, again, a lot of our oppressive structures have demonized and kind of inverted that medicine. You could even look at things like prostitution being this like whoring and dark and shameful thing, versus a time in matriarchal structure where the whore would have been a priestess, right? So you could say even things like sex can be used as medicine, as divine healing, where that's been shamed and demonized in order to control. So, and again, these are just little pieces and nuggets I'm drawing from in the moment. Um, but always take what resonates, leave the rest. Whether I'm doing tarot or sharing stuff like this, it's how it relates to your heart and your life and your, where you are on your journey. Um, so so the rise of matriarchal teachings is coming up. There's a depth of spiritual awakening and systemic collapse via ancestral healing. So someone like myself could say, like, not being able to rationally kind of quantify or understand the journey that I was about to take, but taking it anyway for the idea of maybe grandiosity or a lack of humility, and then going through this very, but like setting the course. So I was already kind of on the path, and then the profundity of actually healing ancestral trauma, generational trauma, and then coming out the other side with a brand new life, really that I would have kind of dreamed of, and being able to sustain that life, because Ulta Love is about sustainability, not profiteering and hoarding, right? So that's circular economy rather than a debt-based economy, which again has us resourcing things and having a human population disconnected from their own source, so they're constantly on this consumerist conveyor belt. But again, a lot of the fractures come from a long historical past of colonialization, imperialism, war, obviously, which you could say a lot of the elitism and global structure, the people profiting off of our divide and conquer and off of um, generational wars, that have fractured our connection to the truth, which is a lot more harmonious than what we see here now in this late stage of a systemic collapse. So, in trusting as well that the unfolding is benevolent, we we live, we die. There is sacred harmony in those entrance and exit points. But again, a lot of that has been fractured, denied. Like, midwives and doulas, they're starting to make a comeback, but we ourselves are having to find that connection to invite those modalities back into our lives so that we can allow people to pass in freedom, right? So then, um, so it's all connected, right? It's all a unified field in essence. So as we continue to connect, awaken to our own source, our own sovereignty, our own inherent well-being, which is again being connected to the heart and the energetics of our physical body and all the layers. This is where practices like yoga come in. They talk about the sheaths and how we have water, we have electricity, we have that magnetism, we have that depth and darkness, right? And all of that kind of connectivity is an aspect of our expression, as in how we show up in this life. And it's just really amazing that the totality of being able to accept who we are in every given moment is also a kind of shift point of allowing false attachments or parts of us that are not true to ourselves that will fall away. And I can certainly testify that, where more recently the grind and the robotic, for me, I was in that groove and grind of waking up and doing the daily tarot, and that was really off of a survival mode, having experienced financial collapse and near homelessness, and just having to show up and just having to keep working at it, right, without any income or without knowing where it was going to lead me or how I was going to survive, but deeply committing to the process and having faith that I would be held and supported, and things would always come through, even very last minute. Someone would show up to help. um and again, I'm only speaking to my own personal experience, but so another piece here is that we will see rising elders and spiritual leaders not aligned with patriarchal supremacy. So part of my awareness is also predominantly in our old structure, even in India, for example, having studied from different yoga schools in India. Um, Usually it's men who are leading the schools or traditions, and when you look at even a historical framework of some of the yogic traditions, they're dominated by men and women weren't allowed to practice. So, um, you know, Indian gurus who come to the West to teach yoga, where women start embracing the practice, really started to metamorph the practice itself, because females were remembering, right, and allowed to take on the practice in their own way, which come through even, a softer vinyasa practice or a more intuitively guided practice, which is something that I've embodied at this point, where as a practitioner, a long-standing practitioner and teacher, I just, every session, there's a very yogic system, right, with meditation and pranayama and movement, but the movement part isn't some robotic doing the same movement every time. It's almost like a download. And if I get feedback from the client about, oh, my back is aching, or I'm dealing with this issue, it's the intuition. It's like during the meditation, there's a download, and certain poses will start to come in. So each session is tailored via the intuition with the intention to enliven, create more vitality, create more awareness, and heal, right? We know that dancing and movement and even singing, which again, relaxation is always a part of a practice, and oming and vocalizing a connection to the heart and connection to the universe is all part of a holistic practice, right? But it's through my own connectivity, rather than surrendering my power to an external deity or an external guru, as if they have more power than self, right? And yet the self is the power point, never the external. The external, they're just symbols that are guiding us along the way, whether it's a book, whether it's a bird, whether it's a dog that comes to keep us company, right? Like, so yes, spirit. And then speaking to that, it's the spiritual leaders that are not playing some guru role in a patriarchal culture because only men can be those leaders. It's, younger people as leaders, and people that are just connected and are self-aware within that connection. And of course, I'm witnessing that just perusing the internet. There's more and more people anchored in their spiritual sovereignty that are sharing their teachings and sharing their wisdom, right? So yeah, this is about the long game, and this is also why I speak about long game, because our world is sort of obsessed with quick fixes and external modifications to try to maintain control over the feeling body, rather than the regenesis, which is allowing the feeling body to purge and release the lower densities to then express a higher base tone of, a collective agreement. Because from my perspective, once we are endeavoring the shadow, we're endeavoring a collective shadow, that we all have threads of these generational wounds, that we all have threads of these supremacist ideations, right? And that we have to keep working through the deep, dark, painful shadow to come back into greater clarity and wisdom. And then things ideally will just rebalance into a more of a community sharing type of thing, rather than a very harsh and brutal system based in divide and conquer and colonialist rule, which again is supremacy and hierarchy, and is really born of fear. Because any real desire to control is a fearful outpouring from within self. There's something here as well that I was getting, which is not fear mongering, but that larger cataclysmic events also reflect a shifting paradigm. So whether it's natural disaster, whether it's global economic things, whether it's sort of grid blackouts, that these sorts of events are also part of a request of awakening to our own light from within. And that we'll see the rise of true beauty, magic, miracles, and again, the matriarchs. So feminine wisdom coming to the fore, regardless of the gender. So dissolution of external beauty via narcissism and greed. I think about, I did a share on TikTok about Kardashians, and it's no doubt, there are people in the world that are exquisitely beautiful, and yet a lot of that external beauty is coming via kind of narcissism and external, And there's nuance here, because there's inherently nothing wrong with that, and there's beauty and light and essence in all beings. But the way we're feeding that, and as far as like, are we just perpetuating our own hoarding and greeding and addiction to power, addiction to control, or are we radiating that beauty to shine light in a healing regenesis for the whole? Are we sharing? Are we looking after our communities, or are we gating ourselves off as a way to maintain superiority? I don't know. I don't know those people personally, right? So, um, and like that idea of narcissism would be like, we want to pretend as though we want to put across a certain personality or a certain level of empathy or kindness, but often if it's generational, depending on that family's ancestral stuff, um, we have to really look at the threads of elitism and hierarchy in all of our global structures, because so much of our um, the people sort of exuding that level of power, their ancestors have come from war, stealing, land grabs, which is why, from a spiritual perspective, I see privilege as a blind spot, that we might want this, we might want that, and there's blockages because the profundity of the shadow that we may have to heal, or that future generations may have to heal, is really deep and quite brutal. If our ancestors were connected to that energy of brutality, of supremacy, of wiping people out to then take and steal their land, um, as a and we recognize that, even I end up being guided to the United Kingdom, where there's the British monarchy, and a lot of that systemic wealth comes via brutality, waging war in places, dividing places up and to conquer them, and stealing a lot of either the land or the jewels or the art, and burning the books and burning the things that we don't want any memory of or history of. But of course, the memory is within us all. That's the divine inheritance. That true memory and remembrance is in the cells of our body, and our connection to the divine spark within us. Because it's all contained in the earth akashic, right? We can't, no matter what's happening on the external, that's just a representation of what's trying to be done, but it's not actually true. So it doesn't hold, right? It might hold for a certain amount of time, but it's not the true essence. So it can't hold forever. It's going to collapse, because it's not the actual structures are not built upon enough truth, right? So here we are moving into greater truth, at the same time facing some of the deepest, darkest shadows. But as we collectively face those deep, dark shadows, we come into greater wholeness to restabilize and create stronger structures, which are better for everybody. So, even though it might be a painful bridge to walk, kind of thing. Um, so yeah, so there's a dissolution of external beauty via the narcissism and greed, and healing the quantum truth is a deeper connection to Earth's frequency. So this is part of the remembrance too, is coming back to relate to the birds and the bees and the sunshine and the moon, and feeling those. That's why astrology is rising in our awareness. And again, a lot of these ancient teachings, which are connected to our celestial blueprint, but it's helping us unlock our seated potential, right? Seated potential in connection to the earth, because this is where we live. I'm thinking for some reason of that recent story about some women going to space, and how, um, like, I just think of late stage capitalism, or like the the falsity of the illusion, that we can paint a picture about, oh, how wonderful that is, but part of the dissociation from the masses who are awakening to reclaim their power, the meek shall inherit the earth, where we see that kind of expose of women just being kind of paraded around as Barbie dolls to make us look like that's power, but there's an illusion there. It's not true power. just because people have money or wealth or whatever doesn't mean they're anchored in their regenesis. Just because they look good and look beautiful doesn't mean they feel good and feel beautiful, kind of thing. Not that we all do, not that that's like a goal, but I think when we're truly loving ourselves and accepting ourselves and honoring ourselves, we make better choices, and more often than not, we can be okay about who we are. We're not harboring all this masked shame and guilt. And again, to each their own. I can only speak for myself. So, the oneness journey is allowing love and unity. It's a detachment from the old structures that I spoke about this that are like, 2000 plus years in the making. So you have to accept that it's going to be probably a few hundred years before we really kind of recognize those systems have collapsed and that we are collectively building anew. There's a lot of resources here. As the awakening unfolds, there will be more people in different positions of wealth and power who will awaken and who will start to um, share what they have, and there will be more people ready to receive those sharings, right? I was getting last night like a download about a blackout, surrendering all control and moving into authenticity and quantum shifting and healing. So people talk a lot about authenticity. Authenticity really is born out of love. And when we are able to be more in our authenticity, that is an aspect of quantum shifting because we're no longer projecting a mask. We're no, and I, oh my gosh, like this idea of masking is so wild to me because we don't know until we know. And it's like the more we know, the less we know. So most of us are so heavily masked that it can take years of healing the shadow to like shed masks that we didn't even know were there. I've spoken a little bit about this, and even my recent exiting of Instagram and Facebook. Um, those were just more masks that I thought I had to wear to get ahead or to promote the brand or like whatever. And this recent shift of a deeper alchemical healing, like a deeper restedness, um, it kind of brought me back into the space of I don't care. And I find it all too distracting. And I really, at this point in my journey, I don't want to listen to other people other than like again relating to people and learning things, which is a joyful endeavor. And my good friends that I connect with and talk to on a regular basis are my astrology teachers that I'm connected to and listening to. But as far as um, this is how the world is, or that idea of sort of trying to figure myself through other people, that's just fallen away. Or certainly with regards to achievement and ambition, it's almost like frightening to a certain degree, but like I guess that's part of like feel the fear and do it anyway, is that I'm tired. I'm bored of it. I'm bored of the endless stream of memes and jokes and information. And I really am increasingly just embracing my quiet life. And I share where I want to share. And YouTube was my original, like, I started sharing on YouTube in 2012. I didn't really start on Instagram until like 2014, 15. And then, there was this phase of like online marketing and studying all this stuff to pioneer an online business. And then even recently working with somebody who was like, you need this app and you need that app and you need to be sharing here and there and there. And it just started to feel like another fucking rat race, which from my own deeper spiritual essence, that was never the point. From a spiritual building new paradigm or new earth perspective, why would I work in the same way that the grid has made us work? Wake up every day and just grind and just be on this app and this app and this app and promote and do all that. It's like, well, but that's not true to me. That's just following the old paradigm grid, and with the facade of it being like spiritual. Whereas to me, I have to live authentically and to share authentically. And again, tarot is a beautiful tool, but what I recognize is it's just another step on my own path of life. And what's coming through is that it's a very useful tool, like astrological. I usually look at transit charts when I'm working with clients. But what's coming in more is like a true psychic, like intuitive knowing, which speaks again, like through whispers or metaphors or symbols or images, where at some point, even using tarot and astrology might fall away to just listen to the download and express that. So we'll see. Okay, so then after this blackout vibratory, which I've heard other people speak of, but I've never authentically received a message about it. Um, and this was significant as far as like feeling this weight and depth from the collective field, and then subtly receiving that, like, so a shift point from a blackout that disrupts the patterns of more waves, right? Think of like an awakening, that these are waveforms coming in to usher new consciousness, like the lockdown, the pandemics, right? Like wars, like these. And so even the darkest aspects of our humanity being acted out is all still part of a greater healing regenesis within our psyches. And the more we do it, the more we understand it, the more we can share it and be it. And that translates into broader evolutionary shifting, right? Because it really is that miraculous. We don't have to be totally connected, but if we're sending out the codes, that in and of itself is like percolating and awakening the divine cells within the whole. I had a friend visit recently talking about the DNA upgrade. It's through these deeper alchemical emotional healings that we receive genetic upgrades, right? So I want to speak because this is something I'm directly dealing with. How about you guys? So the tech and phone and info addiction. This, like, I was speaking to somebody, I'm like, it's like I'll have days where I won't, it's like my phone is just on me all the time, and there's like noise, white noise through the phone, and I'm not listening, I'm not watching, I'm just kind of moving through the different, even after getting rid of Facebook and Instagram, I'm still going from TikTok to YouTube to, and really feeling that hook. And so I'm aware of how the phone addiction is potentially perpetuating a mental fracture and a disembodied wholeness. So I'm fortunate to have a type of life where I can be all at once really aware of the phone addiction and withdraw from it. So I have the awareness to put it down, to go for walks without it, to go outside, to sit and meditate. So I'm aware that this phone addiction is happening, but I also have the capacity and the awareness to completely withdraw from it and access the quietude. And of course, I've bridged and pioneered a life where I'm sharing in these channels, right? So channeling information to share, which is also helping my nervous system and helping me come back into just a greater sense of embodied wholeness. So I'm not frightened of the phone, I'm not being used by it, but I am aware of that potential. And again, without the awareness, the ish is that it perpetuates a mental fracture. It dissociates people from their body, just like the television and the media and the newspapers and the books would incite the fracture. Recognizing that these have been tools of propaganda and psychological warfare for generations. So we have to awaken to that, to know the difference of who we're listening to, what we're engaging with, how it's impacting our own field, and that make more conscious choices. That's part of Unplug for Freedom, one of the Be the Change online courses. So healing is in essence coming from self-sourcing, creativity, reflection, and knowing your nervous system, which again equates to knowing your body. What lights you up, what depresses you, what feels good, what doesn't. And even from a more superficial perspective, that idea is anchored with glow ups and feeling better. It's for years I struggled with body dysmorphia and like body issues, as it were, and holding extra weight that didn't feel comfortable for me. And for me, it was one of those things of letting go of high impact workouts, like no more running, no more like intense, like I was just work out all the time and have a lot of like food issues. Whereas I really got clear in wanting to heal that stuff, started doing the emotional alchemy, choosing truly the foods that I wanted to eat. And that, you know, you can still have chocolate cake and you can still eat the shit, as it were, but mostly knowing that I want to eat good wholesome food, what I consider good healthy wholesome food. And then stop doing, like, I walk, I do yoga, I maybe go roller skating, I do aerial hoops. Like I am an active person, but I'm active in a way that it feels good for me. I'm not following some like fitnessy paradigm. And at times when my nervous system has been more frazzled, or when I'm going through changes, or I'm trying to serve other people, or I'm coming out of my integrity for survival, a lot of those loops like sort of come back in again. An obsession with exercise, overdoing it on that level. So it's been a really interesting journey to look back and like see these different control threads come up and basically just land back home where I unashamedly just listen to my body and express authentically what's coming through. So this is another interesting thought that I had, was that we are potentially trauma bonded to the phone and the tech devices and all info based material. So we're so frightened of our own power that we default into like these external authorities, which don't inherently have power, but they propagate and push that illusion of power onto other. That's an aspect of oppression. And that because of our traumas, we're trauma bonding to these addictive devices, just like an addiction, right? And I'll straight up, like, I definitely am drinking coffee and I'm aware of, you know, addictions and how they can wreak havoc in our lives. But somebody who's spiritually guided, what I'm also aware of is the more you love and accept yourself, the less power that addiction has and the less harm it can potentially do, right? But again, that's coming through a deep awareness and a deep desire to heal, and just allowing it to be there and loving, accepting. Eventually, things will fall away, but we have to be patient with ourselves and give ourselves plenty of love and respect, time to grow, time to explore, time to be creative, and not it's such a nuanced thing, but not be super duper hard on ourselves, but at the same time be fully aware that these are addictions, that this is an addiction, that fundamentally in the long game, you know, my body would be healthier without the sense of need or these anchored regular pattern things. But here I am, just, you know, being straight up. So part of, again, self-reflection and quietude is allowing us to think more critically, to question our existence, to look at technology really, instead of technology being used to enslave us, that we flip it around, and that technology really could be used to relieve us of our enslavement and to give us more time for creativity, joy, and play. That's part of our regenesis. That's part of what keeps us healthy as a being, is creativity, because we're creators, right? We're not slaves to an external construct, but that's been the paradigm that we're living through and rising out of, right? So, and this is, again, we all have our own stories. Maybe other people's stories are to be merged with robots, and who knows, to kind of give away their autonomy, enslavement, and allowing for more creative joy. So the way I see the rising technological information or wisdom is that we're able to use technology to relieve us of our labor, our enslavement, survival labor. But of course, that has to come through a revolution of leadership, leadership through compassion and empathy and love and unity, versus leadership of fear, control, domination, and wounding. Because we could really just, again, different simple ways to look at it, that the majority of our leaders, like the majority of humanity, are wounded humans. You know, they're exhibiting the traits of narcissism and psychopathy and sociopathy, and they're disconnected from their own inner child. They're desperately seeking power and control and domination because they're so wounded. Hence the rising of empathy, the rising of compassion, to heal one as all, really. Detaching from materiality as wealth. Whereas what's going to start to replace materiality as wealth is love, compassion, presence, and kindness and well being. So true leaders are healthy, well, compassionate, kind, and that's not just what we perceive, that's what we feel. That's part of the shift too. The more empathic we are, the more we feel and sense, we can feel someone's integrity. Just like we can notice if certain leaders they put across a really good image, but we get a sense that they're maybe not nice, or straight up, like a lot of us have experienced, where you actually meet these people in person and you're like, oh, weird. I like they don't come. They're not. They don't in human, like human to human. They come across really cold versus like the shiny image they put across on the media, which would be a manipulation tactic, right? Through marketing and selling and etc. And I know some of the best teachers that I've been graced to work with. That's something I really like, was like, yay, they I'm thinking of one of my yoga teachers, Tara Stiles, and her partner, Mike. I forget his last name. He's Tai Chi Mike, um, on social media. So Strala Yoga, basically, they create Strala together. But um, they were exactly like how they come across on the internet. So like when you meet them in person, that's who they are, and that is to me fucking golden. Not that they're, we fluctuate, we have different kind of energetics, but that's authenticity for you. There's no game, there's no whereas of course I have met yoga teachers or spiritual teachers who, how they come across on the media is really not like meeting them in person and relating to them in person is very, very different. Or even experiencing part of their own reactivity or shadow, where I'm like, oh my God, that's the idea of privilege. That's the idea of spiritual bypassing, and how there's plenty of, teachers who have plenty of privilege, who can afford, I guess, to bypass the shadow because they have enough comfort, and they just want fame and success, or they just want the same that everyone wants, that sense of loving attention, thinking that if they have enough, or if they're important enough, or if they acquire enough celebrity or wealth, that will serve them, that will kind of get rid of those underlying pangs of shame, guilt, or unworthiness, right? So yeah, in all fields, that's something about the illusion of separation. That's something about the propagated illusion of the media, is that we're not people. We're not all who we say we are. People are not, just because somebody's saying namaste and chanting om doesn't necessarily mean that they're embodying the fullness of the teachings. And that's something I'm like, we're constantly learning. And yeah, it's just this ever flowing. That's part of why I love Tara and Mike, is like they're breaking down that student teacher wall, which I completely align with. It's not like I'm the guru and you must listen to me, and that's all. They're like, I'm a student and teacher, and we learn from each other. Yeah, that's again a circle versus a line. So yeah, so authenticity truly radiates through a deep inner standing of self, and harmonizing the light and the shadow, or the light and the dark. So knowing the self via healed and uncovered through compassion. And again, for a broader perspective, collective healing and awakening is going to invert or metamorph our value system, where we no longer value just materiality as power and wealth, but see compassion, love, kindness as a new form of wealth, and of course, health and well being, because they go together. Access to power is inherent in DNA. Healing is remembering, it's the divine inheritance. And that's it, you guys. So the final note is systemic healing, which is a collective shadow, which more of us endeavoring to heal the shadow will naturally end up healing our ancestral lineage and have a much broader, not a non-judgmental and compassionate view of the totality. And the more we surrender control, the more our divine inheritance and manifestations will come in. And then that will further teach more and more, and the waves will kind of just keep coming. There's layers and processes to all of this, right? So I hope that you enjoyed that share. Let me know, and have a wonderful day. Look, the sun is shining. Oh, there's a bit of cloud coverage. There's a big storm, and it's definitely chillier here. I'm happy to be here with you all. Thank you so much for visiting my channel. Patreons get ad-free first access, and I'll continue to share as and when I'm guided to. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day, and peace out.